Governor John Hickenlooper held an impromptu signing today, and only 7 News was there. He signed 2 laws that were the result of 7 News investigations uncovering errors by Denver Human Services.
While 7 News investigator John Ferrugia was talking to the governor about his months-long investigation, the governor decided to sign the bills right then.
This is concerning the safe placement of children in foster care homes.
The first of the new laws requires that every adult with access to children in a placement home must undergo an extensive background check, including an FBI fingerprint check, comparison to the National Sex Offender Database, including address verification, and judges must now verify the checks have been completed.
It takes the judges, it takes people at every level of this issue and gives them specific requirements of what they need to take care of to ensure that kids go into safe homes.
The legislature acted after a 7 News investigation found that the Denver Department of Human Services had placed children with a registered sex offender, and then, once they were removed, were placed with a woman convicted of child abuse. We also uncovered that DHS had failed to conduct hundreds of fingerprinted background checks on adults with access to kids in placement homes. That prompted the State Department of Human Services to conduct a statewide audit, finding Denver had collected only 53% of required background data, and in other counties, it was as little as 25%.
This would not be happening at all if it weren't for your investigative work.
State Senator Linda Newell was one of the bill's sponsors.
We will no longer have counties doing it various ways. Every county in the state will be doing background checks in the same way.
The Child Protection Ombudsman.
The governor also signed a bill to make the state Child Protection Ombudsman independent from the State Department of Human Services. Legislators charged there was a clear conflict of interest, as the ombudsman often had to investigate and make recommendations concerning the very agency that controlled its budget. The office will now be in the state judicial department.
By putting in the judicial, I think that is a useful and appropriate compromise.
The office opened in 2011 in the wake of a 7 News investigation in 2008 that uncovered the preventable deaths of several children in Denver. A subsequent state review found a total of 14 such deaths statewide. The sponsor of this new law says our ongoing investigation of current systemic flaws in DHS practice and supervision, including the beating death of 2-month-old Natalie Skinner Hurst and the death of another baby, have helped spur action to make the ombudsman independent.
There is definitely a reason why we need this independent set of eyes to look at cases like that.
And the governor says such outside investigations only improve the system.
I mean, these improvements are constantly evolving and are going to keep evolving, I'm sure. I mean, I don't think we're done, right? I guarantee you that either you or somebody else is going to see some other mistake that we're making, and then we're going to correct it.
Colorado lawmakers back to work tomorrow, and child safety is top of mind for some after a Call 7 investigation revealed Denver Human Services didn't do hundreds of proper background and fingerprint checks. It was the reports of Call 7 investigator John Ferrugia that led to a statewide audit that found serious flaws in keeping kids safe. John?
That's right, Ann, and now that means an effort for new legislation to make sure county agencies are conducting proper checks using current data, making sure kids are not at risk. The state audit found that in the 43 cases sampled in Denver, only 53% of the total elements required for proper background checks were completed. And in other counties, the percentage was even worse.
I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked.
State Senator Linda Newell.
As you found out and the department found out, what is required is not happening.
She says she couldn't believe how many children potentially have been at risk. And she will now sponsor a bill
to make sure that they are doing their local as well as the FBI background check, and also matching it with names and addresses in the sex offender registry.
She says matching addresses, which CDHS is now recommending statewide following our investigation, is essential, because while the primary caregiver may be fine, it is others in the house who may be a threat.
It's making sure anybody who is in that home has that background check.
Call 7 investigation leading to felony charges for a former Denver Human Services caseworker. 7 News uncovering that worker never met with a family as assigned to check on Natalie Skinner Hurst. The infant died in July. Her mother, Kelsey Newell Skinner, charged with her murder. And DHS and police would have never known about all this were it not for Call 7 investigator John Ferrugia, who first uncovered that the caseworker likely falsified her reports. And John, you expected these charges.
I did, Eric. DHS was initially called in on this case after little Natalie's mother tested positive for drugs when Natalie was born. Now, that caseworker, Rochana Madera, was assigned to evaluate the family. But our investigation found, despite DHS denials, she never showed up.
Rochana Madera is charged with forgery and tampering with evidence, both felonies, as well as official misconduct. The Denver DA now alleges, as we first uncovered, that Madera falsified information in official files saying she had met with the family 3 times over several weeks after the case was referred to DHS. But 5 months ago, shortly after Natalie's death, we found Madera never checked on her.
I expected them at the hospital, at the house, maybe even a phone call. I never got one.
Jonathan Hurst is Natalie's father. DHS officials never checked with him, even though he lived in the home where the caseworker was to visit.
I think if they would have came, they would have gave us the right resources to help our family out.
After our initial reports, DHS officials charged in a written press release that our stories were wrong, that the caseworker had investigated and evaluated Natalie over 3 visits with the family. But then, after we aired more stories, DHS Director Penny May began backpedaling, citing problems in the official state record known as trails.
We see the inconsistencies in between the trails record and the external records.
At that point, the case was turned over to the Denver police and the DA. The criminal investigation charged what we reported, that Rochana Madera had in fact failed to do her job and lied about it.
Denver Human Services background check identified a convicted sex offender and a woman convicted of child abuse, but even so, they placed children with them anyway.
Call 7 investigator John Ferrugia, the first to expose this, and prompted an investigation by the state's child welfare watchdog. And John, the DHS failure here is shocking.
It is, Ann, and the state child protection ombudsman says in this new report that, quote, these actions by caseworkers involved with this case were egregious in nature and have directly impacted the safety of children.
The ombudsman, Dennis Goodwin, began looking into this case after seeing our reports that showed 3 children were placed with a boyfriend of a mother who was using cocaine and other drugs. The ombudsman's investigation has now confirmed that the DHS intake caseworker and supervisor both knew the boyfriend had a previous violent history and sex assault, yet they placed the children with him anyway. Only when the mother violated a court order showing up at the boyfriend's house were the kids removed. But, as we reported, the children were then placed with a family member who had been convicted of child abuse. The ombudsman finding that that criminal incident involved one of the children placed in her care. The ombudsman says all of this violated Colorado law. DHS officials acknowledged in the report that staff disregarded their training and state rule and said disciplinary action had been taken. Our reporting found 4 caseworkers and supervisors were suspended. Of those, 1 supervisor continues to work at DHS. The others have left. Our investigation found this one case represented a much larger issue, that DHS was not conducting proper background and fingerprint checks, a fact DHS Director Penny May first denied.
Those procedures are in place and they are being followed.
But a subsequent state audit showed DHS was only completing 53% of required tasks for background checks, and it was even worse in other counties. DHS has now implemented new procedure to ensure proper checks.
Well, it is a showdown between the governor and the legislature. At issue, who will control the office of the child safety watchdog?
Now, the governor wants control, but as Call 7 investigator John Ferrugia reports, the legislature says that's not a good idea.
These are some of the faces of 14 children whose deaths could have been prevented if not for systematic failures by the human services system uncovered by a Call 7 investigation in 2008. This conclusion by the Colorado Department of Human Services resulted in a Child Welfare Action Committee that recommended sweeping changes in the state child welfare system.
The Ombudsman Office was actually one of the recommendations from that committee.
State Senate Democrat Linda Newell has been the driving force behind making that office, established in 2010, able to investigate state and county agency policies, procedures, and failures to ensure child safety. Along with Republican Assistant Majority Leader Kevin Lundberg, there is now an effort to move the state child welfare ombudsman to the auditor's office, where it would operate independent of the State Department of Human Services, which now controls it.
the only opposition are those being monitored.
That's right. The governor and his Human Services Department, CDHS, and county agencies subject to the Ombudsman's investigations are fighting to keep the office under the governor. His proposal?
We'd like to move the Office of the Ombudsman over to Public Health and the Environment because they have the statutory authority to investigate children's deaths already.
The office would be overseen by a board he would appoint.
The governor appoints the board. That's not independence.
Both Lundberg and Newell say that isn't acceptable because it is CDHS that will be advising the governor on both board members and who will be the ombudsman.
Remember, this is happening because children have died within the system and there was no proper oversight. The media, you brought it forth. It wasn't within the system, it was outside, but we need that, that ability for that to happen on an ongoing basis. We can't just rely on somebody to figure it out because of a news report.
And now, with new errors and lack of oversight uncovered by our current investigation, they say it's time to move quickly.
Background checks aren't being made. There are just a lot of balls being dropped, and it's quite obvious that more needs to be done for accountability.
And there is a new bill designed to help keep our Colorado kids safe. It's on its way to the governor's desk to be signed into law. This new measure will ensure that adults in homes where state agencies place children have to go through enhanced background checks.
The legislature acted after Call 7 investigator John Ferrugia found Denver Human Services placing children with a registered sex offender and then a convicted child abuser.
Every county in the state will be doing background checks in the same way to make sure that all kids, no matter where they're placed, will have a safe home.
State Senator Linda Newell, who is not only the bill's sponsor but a longtime advocate for child welfare, says it's not only that every county will be required to use the same databases, but
all of the adults are going to have background checks now, not just the initial caretaker, the care provider, but every adult in that home.
The bill was introduced after a Call 7 investigation found Denver Human Services had failed to complete more than 350 fingerprint and background checks on adults with access to kids in placement homes. Our investigation subsequently sparked a state audit showing Denver completing only 53% of required data, and in other counties, it was even worse. House sponsor Jonathan Singer says there's a reason the bill passed the legislature almost unanimously.
Senate Bill 87 is passed.
We know that those foster parents are now not criminals, not sex offenders, and they're going to be there to protect our most vulnerable resource, our children.
And Newell credited 7 News for making the public and the legislature aware of a critical child safety issue.
This would not be happening at all if it weren't for your investigative work.
A 2-month-old baby boy beaten so badly he doesn't survive. His dad in jail accused of murder. Tonight, questions about why DHS did not remove the baby from a violent home. Call 7 investigator John Ferrugia has been uncovering serious errors by the Denver Department of Human Services. And John, this is apparently another opportunity missed to save a child.
It is, Ann. 2-month-old D'Anthony Herron died of head injuries last July. His father, Michael Herron, is charged with murder. But until now, no one outside DHS and the family has known that the agency was involved and that there have been years of complaints and referrals and red flags, raising questions about how DHS could have allowed Michael Herron to care for that baby.
I get to the hospital and they have D'Anthony hooked up to all these wires already, and they have his head wrapped, and he wasn't even conscious. And I just broke down and I couldn't believe it.
Doctors told Amber Lucero that her 2-month-old baby D'Anthony had been abused by her boyfriend, Michael Herron.
He had a skull fracture. He had bleeding in the brain, and his brain was swollen and his skull was pushed up, and he had suffered from seizures and a stroke.
Doctors told her there was no hope of saving this tiny child who had been born bright-eyed and healthy. Amber and her mother held the baby, now with almost no brain function, for 2 hours after nurses unhooked him from life support.
And I just remember he went like that for the last time, and his head just rolled to the side, and that's when we just knew.
Do you think that Michael should have ever had those children?
No.
Our investigation has found that Michael Herron had a long history of mental illness, a police record that includes domestic violence and drug use, and a list of referrals or complaints to Denver Human Services that stretches back to 2002. In fact, a complaint was made to DHS when DeAnthony was born in May of 2014. At the time, the parents were living apart.
He started calling me names. He started calling my mom names. He started getting loud. So security came in.
Hospital security?
Yeah. And he was threatening to take DeAnthony and just leave that day. So that's when the social worker came in.
According to DHS documents submitted to juvenile court and obtained from the family, that social worker called DHS. Hospital staff concerned about Mr. Herron's ability to care for DeAnthony and was very angry at the hospital. And there was a second call the following day by an unlisted party. The complaints were not accepted and unfounded. Michael Herron took home the newborn to care for him and his other 2-year-old son.
The way he is with his temper and his attitude, I don't think that he should have the kids.
On July 15th, DHS was called again, heard Mr. Herron screaming at the kids. The next day, his 2-year-old son had a scratch on his face. DHS opened a case for physical abuse, but sources familiar with the investigation say it is unclear whether the caseworker actually met face-to-face with Herron or the children. And DHS left the kids with Michael Herron. 5 days later, he is accused of beating the baby. And doctors found it wasn't the first time the child had been injured.
Because he had previous injuries that were already healing, that all of his ribs were broken.
Records show that DHS caseworkers and supervisors knew Michael Herron was a serious risk. In 2013, complaint founded for domestic violence. Mr. Herron was punching and choking Miss Lucero. Again in 2013. Complaint not accepted. Mr. Herron screaming at Miss Lucero and pushing her. Mr. Herron reports he does not know how to calm a crying baby. In 2009, complaint founded for sexual abuse for assaulting his daughter by a previous marriage. Herron was arrested, but charges were dropped as the child may have been too young to testify. And in 2004, DHS records show Mr. Herron is bipolar.
He started writing suicide notes when he was about 17, maybe 18, talking about he was going to kill himself.
Danny Herron is Michael Herron's father.
They took him to this mental hospital up here. I don't know what street exactly it's on. And that's when they diagnosed that he had bipolar.
He had bipolar disorder?
He is guardian of his granddaughter who made the sexual abuse complaint against Michael Herron when she was 7 years old. The claim founded by DHS.
Danny, does it make any sense to you that Human Services, knowing what they knew, gave him children?
No. I don't see why they would have did that at all.
Records make clear, and Amber admits, that the couple was often violent with one another. But even with all the referrals and complaints to DHS and the concern after DeAnthony was born.
Had you ever seen a caseworker from Denver Human Services?
No.
Never?
No.
Remember this baby beaten to death and whose father is charged with his murder? 7 News investigator John Ferrugia raised questions about why little DeAnthony Herron was left with a man who has a history of violence and mental illness. The death of this baby was so disturbing to us and the signs of trouble so clear that John has been digging deeper, finding thousands of safety concerns that Denver Human Services simply does not accept for investigation.
I get to the hospital and they have his head wrapped and he wasn't even conscious. They put him on a life support because he couldn't breathe on his own.
Amber Lucero, the mother of DeAnthony Herron, was with her child when he died.
They put him in my arms and they unplugged him.
But you were there with him?
Yeah.
A DHS report submitted to the court and obtained by 7 News shows that Michael Herron, now accused of murder, had a history of mental illness, domestic violence, and even sexual assault on an older daughter. Yet Denver Human Services and other counties repeatedly screened out or rejected concerns about the children in his custody.
There are a half a dozen red flags here.
Sherry Shink is founder of the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center.
My God, this guy was asked to leave a shelter for domestic violence as well as the other domestic violence, so it's not just...
She has also been on the advisory board of the State Child Protection Ombudsman. As a lawyer, she has been involved in child welfare for 3 decades, representing the interests of kids.
It makes no sense to me. What were they thinking? I mean, you don't need to have a master's degree in anything to know that this baby is at risk.
And assessment of risk is a critical task for every county human services agency in the state, asking what is the likelihood a child will be harmed. Counties use a standard state risk assessment tool to make this judgment. and it's to be filled out according to the state law known as Volume 7 rules.
It determines all of the decisions that you're going to make until something changes.
It's critical.
It's absolutely critical. It's the foundation of all the work that's going to be done for that child and that family.
That means if the risk assessment is not completed properly and the right questions aren't answered, a child could be left in danger of injury or death. We have obtained the latest detailed state review of county agency practices. The data show that as of November of last year, Denver Human Services completed the risk assessment in accordance with state law only about 55% of the time, and that includes thousands of assessments. That's right, only 11 of every 20 risk assessments were completed accurately, and records show in previous months it was even worse. And even more disturbing is that the statewide average for the accuracy of risk assessments for the other counties last November was less than 60%. Little DeAnthony Herron died last July after multiple complaints or referrals about his father, Michael Herron, spanning years, but most were screened out.
This is a big issue. The concern is that tomorrow we could have another dead baby, or that next week or next month.
What's more, culling state records, we found that since 2011, Denver Human Services, while the largest agency in Colorado, averaged a smaller percentage of accepting referrals or complaints than any other county in the state. Our investigation finds that DHS accepts only about 30% of all referrals for further assessment, screening out 7 of 10, including multiple referrals involving Michael Herron.
There's something wrong, because this should never have been screened out. And if this is one of those 70% screened out, how many other kids that are among that group maybe haven't been killed, but what if they've been seriously injured? We can't be confident that we have a system, that's got the safety net that we all suggest that it is. There are gaps and there are holes in that safety net.
The State Department of Human Services, the child welfare watchdog, even our state lawmakers have all been questioning errors made by Denver Human Services, errors uncovered by 7 News that have contributed to child deaths. It's unclear what Denver Mayor Michael Hancock is doing about the problems in his department, so 7 News investigator John Ferrugia went to ask him.
I care just about as much as you do about every child that's in this system. Unfortunately, mistakes are made, and when those mistakes are made, they're tragic, and they're not okay with any of us.
One of those tragedies was the beating death of 2-month-old DeAnthony Herron, his father charged with murder. Our investigation raised questions about DHS procedures in allowing the father to go home to care for a newborn baby and a 2-year-old. Michael Herron has a history of mental illness, violence, a founded complaint to DHS for sexually assaulting his own daughter, and drug use. DHS knew all this, but allowed Herron to care for the children alone.
These are management errors.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
They're also human errors, and we know.
But who are you holding accountable in management for this?
We hold everyone accountable through the entire system, John.
But we have obtained new documents that show DHS assessment practices are putting more kids at risk.
They're worse.
Okay, I haven't seen them. So
they're worse than the last time we talked.
Okay, I'll take a look at it.
The most recent review of DHS practices by the State Department of Human Services shows that proper safety assessments, which are critical to determining whether to remove a child from a home, are being completed properly less than 50% of the time, down from 78% just 6 months ago. As for risk assessments, critical reports in deciding whether a child could be harmed in the home in the future, the state review found Denver County's performance on risk assessments was at 44%. That's right, only about 4 of 10 of these critical assessments to keep kids safe are being completed properly. That's down from 58% 6 months ago, which was already lower than the state average. So what is going on at DHS?
So the legislature's passed new laws as a result of the errors made at DHS. The ombudsman's got
not just DHS, throughout the entire county system of the state.
The ombudsman 4 separate investigations. DHS is forcing you to do an outside review.
Sure.
What are you doing?
We're monitoring that review. Everything they've asked us to do is underway. We are continuing to correct those situations where we have found challenges.
And then, his frustration evident over the questions he clearly does not like about the failures we have uncovered, the mayor made an accusation that our questions are not really about keeping kids safe.
I don't know what more you want. I know you like a history of getting people fired. I don't roll like that. We're going to do it based on the books, and we're going to do it based on the job and the standards of protecting the children as much as we can.
Is this about me?
And you're not. No, I'm just telling you, you're not going to drive my decisions on personnel. We're going to do it based on the facts
Am I trying
that
to
we
do
find.
that?
I think you are.
You think my questions to you are
I think
aimed
you
at-
are. You keep asking the same question 10 times. I keep telling you, we'll hold people accountable.
But the questions the mayor won't answer are who will be held accountable, how, and when.
New developments at Denver Human Services today following a year-long 7 News investigation about errors leading to the deaths of 2 children. The chief of the department, Penny May, removed from her position and replaced by the current city mental health coordinator. 7 News investigator John Ferrugia is in the newsroom. And John, just last Friday, the mayor told you he had confidence in May's management.
Yeah, that's right, Eric. And he angrily accused 7 News of trying to influence his personnel decisions by asking questions about who he would hold accountable for the ongoing management errors we've uncovered. Clearly, he answered that question today. By replacing May with the well-known former city auditor, Don Morris, the mayor hopes to bring order to an embattled department that is responsible for the city's most vulnerable children.
I'm the kind of guy that likes to get to the bottom of the issues and fix the issue.
Don Morris is known as a good manager and a savvy politician. He knows he has work to do.
I'm concerned every day that every investigation is done right. You know, that every placement is done with the right kind of background checks and everything that has to be done unquestionably. And I think the great majority, the huge majority of those situations are done very well. And to the degree that there are issues, I intend to look into them and then make a judgment about what we should do.
More questions about this little boy, Javion Johnson's death. 7 News investigator John Ferrugia confirming the little boy's family was the subject of several complaints to the Denver Department of Human Services.
Now, this comes hours after Javion's mother and the mother's boyfriend were arrested on suspicion of child abuse resulting in serious bodily injury. Those who knew the little boy still stopping by the family's home, adding to a memorial that's been growing outside. And the mayor of Denver saying today he believes the city failed this little boy.
And 7 News investigator John Ferrugia is here uncovering tonight specific details about the complaints to which DHS did not respond, John.
That's right, Eric. Sources familiar with this investigation say DHS received 6 separate complaints concerning this family. The last was in 2013 when the baby was born exposed to drugs. At least one other complaint was about the condition of older children and came from a school. Now, sources say none of the complaints prompted DHS to open a case or to visit the family. Now, this is the 3rd child death in the past year where DHS has been involved. Now, with this death, the mayor is getting personally involved with his troubled department.
I was and have been shaken to my core as I have been briefed on the developing facts of this tragedy.
And those facts are brutal and disturbing. A 23-month-old toddler horribly burned, his mother and her boyfriend arrested for his death. 2 other children also died this past year, 2-month-old Natalie Skinner-Hurst and 2-month-old DeAnthony Heron, beaten to death. Family members charged with murder, our investigation uncovering errors by DHS that failed to save them. But it was the death of little Javion Johnson that finally caused the mayor to go to DHS today, meeting with 20 caseworkers and supervisors seeking answers.
Following a 7 News investigation that uncovered serious errors surrounding the deaths of 3 children, we've learned Denver Human Services will spend $60,000 to look deeper into the agency. 7 News investigator John Ferrugia is here. And John, it was your investigation that led to this third-party review.
Eric, it was, and this analysis is now going to be conducted by a researcher and his team from Colorado State University, and it's going to begin this month.
Meanwhile, the Denver Department of Human Services will now get millions of dollars to increase the number of caseworkers and supervisors. All of this following an ongoing year-long investigation by child deaths, by Denver 7 investigator John Ferrugia.
John joins us now from the newsroom. And John, this could certainly be a boost to this troubled department whose caseworkers seem to be overloaded.
Yeah, Mitch, the City Council has approved more than $3.4 million for the Child Welfare Division of DHS, and that will allow the agency to hire more than 50 new caseworkers and supervisors to reduce those caseloads, and it's going to bring more scrutiny to cases where children might be in danger. Now, the council acted after our investigation of 3 child deaths where we uncovered that DHS made significant errors and did not respond to multiple complaints that children were at risk. Now, this new funding is at the center of a plan unveiled by new DHS Director Don Morris, who is trying to bring systemic change to the troubled agency.
We didn't just say we're going to hire frontline people. People might think, well, just have more people looking at all these files. Well, I think it's so imperative that supervisors who are really have the experience and they're more steeped in this are looking at the work that's being done so they can make sure that the decisions as best they can be made are the best decision we can make for kids. This is about how do you improve your systems, and I am all ears on how I can improve our systems.
The DHS is now hiring and is looking for caseworker candidates who are interested in working with children and families, and they're also looking for experienced supervisors. We have a link at thedenverchannel.com where you can get more information. In the newsroom, I'm Denver 7 investigator John Ferrugia.